talk will be entitled today's Nationalist and Illiberal Movements, an Israeli perspective.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Alvin. Thank you, Bethany. Thank you, all the organizers for having us here. And my talk is indeed about an Israeli perspective, and I divided it into two. The first part is an Israeli perspective on the research of anti-Semitism, and the second one goes on to be related indeed to what was recently termed by Urban illiberal countries or illiberal regimes. As to the first part, perhaps it would come as a surprise to some of you, but in Israel, as a state and as a society, attitudes to anti-Semitism for the first decades, I would say, some four decades at least of the existence of the state, there is no attitude. There is no relating as a society, government, to anti-Semitism. There are no centers of research. The first one was founded by Yehuda Bauer in 1982, not before 1982. After Bauer, a few others, and sitting with us is Professor Manuela Consoni, who courageously entered the shoes of our late friend Robert Wiesel. There was no teaching during this year, there wasn't, and in fact until this very day, there is little, very little, teaching about anti-Semitism in Israeli high schools and university. I can tell you that when I was the head of the department, but the contents committee decided that anti-Semitism, what kind of a subject is this? I was allowed to teach on Jewish reactions to anti-Semitism, but not anti-Semitism itself. And the first appearance of the Cantor Center, it was, never mind what it was before, 1992. 1992 came scholars, friends, colleagues from the Department of General History and said, Dina, this is not an issue. Each Jew can tell you what anti-Semitism is. It doesn't really require research. And go tell him that every issue under the sun can be researched, but anti-Semitism not. Today, I think they changed their mind, but it was so, believe me. I suggest an assumption that during these 40 more or less years, the subject was not approached because of Zionism, because the state was supposed to solve the problem, not to research it and to relate to it. It was supposed to solve the problem, and if not solve, at least make it stay away, leave it outside of our borders. I can quote Ben-Gurion. I won't go back to Herzl, that's a complicated thing, but Ben-Gurion was clear. It is inconceivable that nations will adapt the reality to the existence and mentality of this universal outsider called Judaism. This universal outsider called Judaism. The source of our trouble is not the wickedness of the Gentiles. They originate in our abnormal stateless status. In other words, if we have a state, it will be okay. So now we have a state, we don't have to speak about anti-Semitism. Youngsters, youth, of these 4 decades did not know much, and this is an understatement, did not know much about anti-Semitism, and this was considered a victory for Zionism. They don't know. I once lectured to soldiers, and it was a full day. Next lecture was Professor Yeshayahu Leibovich. So, no, you should hear him. So I sat at the back, and before he started talking, one of the soldiers got up and said, Professor, before you start, there was here this young lady, בחורה אחת, and she said that the Jewish people is about to dominate, I was talking about the protocols, about to dominate the world, and that we are organized, and that we are well-financed. Can you comment on that? The idea that it was a libel against these soldiers and against all of us, it did not sink in, okay? So this was definitely considered a victory for Zionism. It wasn't only the general history department, and I collected a number of arguments that were taken up inside the department of Jewish history, our department in Tel Aviv University, and it is the following. Please listen. The research of anti-Semitism is an obstacle on the normalization of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. Because it's an obstacle. We will never be normal if we go on dealing with anti-Semitism. Recognizing the full weight of anti-Semitism in Jewish history is destructive. It's destructive to the self-esteem of a person, of a Jewish person. And therefore, you shouldn't recognize this full weight. It's dangerous. The study of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust necessarily comes at the expense of the study of Judaism and its contribution to the world, and it's the positive side of contribution, the riches of Judaism. It's the negative. We shouldn't deal with that. And one final argument, it is an insult to Zionism to see in anti-Semitism that is an external pressure, makes for an external pressure to see in it the decisive factor that brought about Zionism. As Herzl said, as others said, yeah, that we became, why did we become Zionists? Because of the anti-Semitic pressure. And why is it an insult? Because this way, Zionism is emptied of its positive content, its inner positive content. Okay? And for all these reasons, leave anti-Semitism alone. Okay? Now, needless to say, there were no governmental tools this year to deal with the problem. Not in the late 40s, 48, the 50s, 60s, 70s. It was towards the end of the 80s, that Eliakim Rubinstein, now retired deputy president of the Supreme Court, and then he was secretary of the government, among the many functions that he fulfilled. Eliakim Rubinstein put up a forum for coordination. These are the late 80s. Anti-Semitism is already boiling again. And a coordination forum to which he invited representatives of institutes, universities, etc. And the first thing he told us is, should we have this forum and really interfere in the business of other countries in which anti-Semitism is on the rise? How, if we do so, we will monitor anti-Semitism, we'll look at what is happening, but if we interfere in favor of Jews in other countries, we will be strengthening with our own hands the allegation of double loyalty, because then it would be so clear that Israel is also behind these Jews. And therefore we should really be careful. And he said, you know what, let's make a trial. We will interfere and see if anyone says anything. And if not, we will go on. So, and so it was. It was only in the days of Sharansky, Nathan Sharansky, already in the 90s, that it was decided that the minister who is in charge of the diaspora will also be in charge of anti-Semitism. And it started with Sharansky in the 90s. And in parallel, a committee in the Knesset, the Committee of Immigration and Absorption, Aliyah U'Klita, will be responsible for the issue. So much so that in 1994, okay, we're in the 90s, in 1994, we wrote the first report on anti-Semitism worldwide, and we are doing it, ST is a partner since then, we are doing it since 1994, an annual report, and some of you are contributing to it, Yoel and Zbigniew and others. Okay. We came with a report, the president of the university, Bronfman, and me, we came with a report to Rabin, the late Prime Minister Rabin's office in Tel Aviv, Bakirya. And he had a head of office who said, listen, Rabin is a Sabra. He doesn't like anti-Semitism, Holocaust, crying and shrying. 10 minutes and you are out. Okay. So we said no. 10 minutes with Rabin is also something. We came in, but he was wrong, this head of office. We stayed there for an hour and a half, and he was not only interested, he asked and he spoke, and okay. Since 2005, when International Holocaust Memorial Day was decided on by the United Nations, the government has a special session, but it's only once a year, I can tell you. Once a year, a special session to commemorate this day, and it is also called the Day of the Struggle Against Anti-Semitism. Departments for the struggle against anti-Semitism were put up in the Foreign Ministry. Rani Jacobi, who heads this department, is sitting with us, and also with the diaspora, because as we said, the diaspora minister is in charge. All this is a development of recent decades. So I would like to share with you an assumption. What happened after these decades in which there was so little? What happened towards the late 80s, 90s, and since then? What happened, I would say, is Israel and Zionism have become more Jewish than before. It is less of the socialist, secular society that we were. We are, you don't have to be a believer, but Jewish traditions, etc. We are more Jewish, and since we are more Jewish, then we more accept that we are part of the Jewish people, and not outside, and not something new that doesn't belong. And anti-Semitism is part of the life of the people. For that, Israel should be part of the struggle against anti-Semitism. Moreover, not only Ben-Gurion was wrong, and the state did not, the existence of the state did not solve the problem, it did not solve the problem, it became part of the problem. It became part of the problem with, I like the idea, by the way, of a new definition. I've had enough of the working definition of anti-Semitism. Now we'll define anti-Zionism, and that we'll go on with it. It did not solve the problem, it became part of the problem, and anti-Semitism is not, as Ben-Gurion said, because we don't have a state, or because of the exile, but because, as you know, anti-Semitism is a political, emotional, social tool, active when there are Jews and where aren't, and that's it. I'll finish this first part by telling you that a wealthy Jewish person in Belgium has a, I cannot say beautiful, but a very unique collection of anti-Semitic artifacts. A walking cane with a Jewish nose, a pipe with a Jewish nose, a plate with hands embracing money, etc., etc. An exquisite collection, what can I say? Okay, he got in touch, and I ran around in Israel to find a place for this collection. It's a unique collection. And everyone said, Toda Rabba. No, no. What was the argument? The argument was that we don't want to be depicted like this. We don't want our children to see that. No, you can. So it found a place in Berlin. Now, let me go on to the second part. And this will bring us to the question of the regimes, the East European regimes. A parallel process that I would not outline because it is far too long and complicated, but just mention that a parallel process to the attitude towards anti-Semitism was there regarding the Holocaust. First decades, no research, no etc., etc., you know the whole story. Then came the Eichmann trial. It was before there, Kastner trial, but it wasn't fully dealt with. Only in the middle of the 60s, a study began in the universities, and even then you had to convince. 1977, after the change of in political power with Menachem Begin, came about the first really large, comprehensive plan to teach the Holocaust in high schools. Not before 1977, and it took a few years after the decision till it really became viable and came to schools. And the same arguments. We don't want to raise scared children who would think that this and that was done to their grandfathers or their families, etc., etc. There was a real wish to distance ourselves from that. With the wars, 1967, the weeks, what we call Hamtana, the weeks of waiting before the 6 Days War, speaking about Auschwitz borders of the state. Then there was a song that became so popular, the world is against us. העולם כולו נגדנו, the world is against us. They will forsake us again, no problem. Then came the Yom Kippur War. With the wars, with time, with the maturing and opening of Israeli society, the Holocaust became more and more of an issue that is accepted and an issue that you have to deal with. And again, because Israel became more and more Jewish. But if I again may share with you an assumption, I think that with time, with the maturing and with the wars and becoming more Jewish, a dual Israeli identity came about. A dual Israeli identity. An Israeli is one who is a rescuer because it brings in, as Elchanan said, brings in non-white Jews from all over. But he is also son or grandson, if not himself, to survivors. And demographically speaking, I don't have to remind you that about 360,000 Jews who were in the country before World War II, they weren't there, they were not survivors, they were in the country, lost their families. And the survivors about the same number, which together are some good 700,000, lost their families, which means that the impact, the demographic impact on Israeli society is so deep, you couldn't ignore it, you couldn't run away from it. So he's a rescuer and a survivor. He builds a new, strong identity, but he also identifies more and more with history, Jewish faith, Jewish diaspora, Jews abroad. He is educated to be physically courageous and able, but he definitely also understands the bravery of the spirit and the way people held themselves during the Holocaust. He is a Jew that can close himself up in his Israeli borders, but he's also citizen of the world. I would say that this dual identity explains the different attitudes and the hot debate that came about recently in Israel regarding states and regimes that are illiberal, especially in Eastern Europe, but not only. Let me now divide it into the government arguments for the ties with the illiberal regimes, and then show or speak about the criticism of the government, which includes, as we said on Sunday, criticism on Yad Vashem. I'll speak about that shortly again, and then try to see how, according to generations, first generation survivors and others, middle generation and the young ones, how and what is the reaction that developed. So, and all this under the assumption that there is a dual identity that gave way to so many opinions. I tried to collect as far, I cannot say that I have a professional survey, but I collected as much as I could reactions during the months of this debate. That has not subsided, but some months were hotter than others. The arguments of the government for the ties are: the world goes politically to the right. The right movements, not only in Eastern Europe, in other parts of the world as well, the right is gaining political power, political positions, not even only in Europe, outside Europe as well. Why do we need a visit of the Visegrad countries? That's Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic. Why do we need them? Because we have problems with the European Union. The European Union would like two-state solution, an agreement with Iran, that are both not so comfortable for Israel, and then with them you can ally against the EU. They are attacked by the EU because of the immigrants question, that's for sure. One more point is that these are countries that are less anti-Zionist. They don't have Muslims, they are less anti-Zionist, and the Western Europe is so much more critical, so it is easier to have contacts with them. One other point, Jews feel safer in East European countries, feel safer. There is less violence than in the West. And I wanted, of course, to check it out, and there is a survey of the Joint, there are so many surveys recently, but one of the Joint says that 96% of Jewish leaders and professionals in Eastern Europe felt safe, compared to 76% in Western Europe. 76% is not as ametzir in itself, but, and then that 47% in the West are afraid of violent anti-Semitism and terrorism, compared to 22% in the East. So, if you take all of this together, it's not just a matter of going with the right, but it's the wish not to be isolated politically in the world, to handle ties and contacts in a more comfortable arena, and this question of not to be isolated politically as a nation is a point that derives exactly, that comes exactly from this dual identity we spoke about. Well, needless to say that this attitude of the government got was criticized sharply in the media, by intellectuals, in the academia, everywhere. There is no way, all these are not arguments that Israeli society can accept. There is no way we should be, or can allow ourselves to be in direct or good contact with them, because these are extreme right radicals, regimes suppressing freedom of speech, suppressing the judicial system, and trying to force a nationalist narrative with a close tie to World War II and an attempt to change World War II and the Holocaust. And this is exactly the opposite of what Israel should stand up to. Included in this, as we said on Sunday, was a criticism of Yad Vashem as well. You remember we spoke about the Strach visit, and I told you that the visit was not a state visit. The place is open, and he just came in. Okay? The protocol says that state visitors should go to Yad Vashem. Okay, we tried a number of steps to mitigate it a bit. I will tell you only about two of them. One is that the head of Yad Vashem, for instance, did not receive Urban personally when he was on a visit. But he went home and he appointed a researcher of Hungary to walk around with him. Same was done with Poroshenko, but with Poroshenko we were even wiser, and had his visit in the afternoon. Okay, in the afternoon, it's already not exactly a working day, and someone else, not the head of Yad Vashem, was accompanying him. I wrote to the committee. There is a committee in the Knesset for events and ceremonies, Vadat Tkasim Ve'Iruim, events and ceremonies, and I asked them to have another procedure. And the procedure would be that first a visitor goes to Herzl's tomb, because Herzl is the prophet, as we say, of the state. And first of all, you should emphasize that this is a state to the people of which a Holocaust happened, and not a Holocaust that put up a state. First of all, you go to Herzl's tomb, and then you go to Yad Vashem. Okay? And that would make it different. Suggestion was accepted, but it is not always implemented. It's a matter of time, of distance, etc. But at least we tried. Now, government criticism, other generations. I don't have too much time, but
2 minutes.
No, 2 minutes. First generation, definitely. First generation, you cannot generalize, because Today we have 190,000 survivors still living with us. But even, it's half the number more or less. But even there you cannot generalize and come out and say that they have one political opinion or one opinion on anything. It's out of question that 190 Jews will have one opinion on any question, and but some of them are definitely stronger in saying, in holding up a criticism and saying they, which means Gentiles, they were, are, and will be anti-Semitic. And that's it, and we should not come closer to them at all in any way. Those who were rescued by non-Jews, those who were rescued, hid, and saved by non-Jews have a completely opposite opinion, that's for sure. The middle generation, that's interesting as far as I could see. The middle generation says we should be, as Ben-Gurion said once, a nation like all other nations. If we put up a list of all those who harmed the Jewish people and sinned against it, we have nowhere to go. Let's build a fence and stay inside. The Lithuanians murdered, what about the Hungarians, the Romanians, the Ukrainians, etc.? What about the French police that was so diligent? That Dutch that gave in those who tried to hide. Poland is so much now on the table, but let's put it into proportion. What about the Germans and the Austrians? If we go on reminding everyone always of what they did to us, then we have no place as citizens of the world. Identity-wise, as I'm trying to show, identity-wise, that's a problem. That's a problem, and indeed analysts say the following. One of them said, because of personal and family experience, many Israelis tend to set a low bar when it comes to judging Eastern countries. Because that question of where are we in the world is there. And since Alvin is looking at me with threatening eyes,
No.
I will say that
Respectful eyes. Respectful eyes.
The younger generation, you know what they say, the younger generation, according to all surveys, is closer not to the generation of his parents, but to his grandparents. And you know why? They have a common enemy. And they definitely are closer to their grandparents. They go on trips to Poland, but they also raise the questions. And they raise questions about sensitivity, about being more generous to others, about acknowledging the suffering of others. And I will end with the following that you wouldn't believe, but this is how it was some 2 weeks ago. I brought with me here the newspaper. A student of mine, Rachel Chadayo, takes groups of youngsters to Poland for many years now. And she developed a whole system of the youngsters meeting Polish youngsters. And this is very fruitful, and they meet and they speak to each other. And she organized in Auschwitz a ceremony in which not only the Jewish, the Israeli students, high schools, all of them, read out names, as we do always on Holocaust Memorial Day, L'chol Ish Yeshem, reading out names of those who perished in the Holocaust. But the Polish students also read out names of Polish relatives who were killed during the war or in camps. And they spoke, and they had this ceremony, and the Israeli youngsters said later, well, it was a revelation. They also have relatives. Who, how come? And not only that, he said, okay, there are Poles who sinned against us, But look, we are young, we want to have a mutual future. Now, is this historically correct? No. Can you put the two on the same level, the Holocaust and what, in the suffering of the Poles? Historians would say, no. Could you indeed say, well, some Poles? No, many Poles. But the feeling that came out of this visit was that youngsters would like another attitude, that they would like to, and with this I end, to have really the identity that we were speaking about before, that we have a place in the world, that it is not only the past that we have to cherish and we have to research, of course, but we also should look forward with sensitivity, with generosity, with an eye to the future. Thank you.